being able to communicate your understanding, because that's the opposite of blind obedience, and that's it's Mark Passio, who's an interesting fellow, gives lectures on natural law and Trivium, and he says, that there's master think and slave think. I think I might have touched on this before, and that basically what's being sold in the widespread sense through media and taught, trained as education is slave think, and then there's these other schools like John Taylor Gatto. If you look down in the bottom of the curriculum, there's some links to some of his work. And he was a school teacher for 30 years, an award-winning school teacher. And he talks about the elite boarding schools where these things are still very, very much taught, just how I'm teaching it to you in terms of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, of how to reason. But not just how to reason, but how to use your rhetoric to convince other people that your reasoning is the way. Which you see a lot, and the sort of dark arts of rhetoric are also included in that, I think, more some places than others, depending on the teacher and the class and the capacity of the students to understand that teaching. But the dark arts, it's kind of a silly way of putting it, but it's by that I mean the ability to use speech to manipulate, to deceive, to cover up, to spin, as it's called so often nowadays. Lying is now called spin, and so yeah, that's those are the things that are taught in more exclusive schools that you can only get into if you have large amounts of money to pay to get into them. And even then, sometimes if you're not from the right family, if you don't have the right social connections, you still will be denied access to those schools. That's the way it's cut up. That's the way the whole thing is designed to work. It's much like in higher learning, quote unquote. The way that most university classes don't really emphasize this sort of clear reasoning either. But then Ivy League schools, the good schools, the ones you really want to get into, those ones nearly always have a much more robust philosophy and logic and and rhetoric, especially, how to speak publicly and give inspire and and speak beautifully to impress people and to convince people and all of that. It's something that's you see much more. If you talk to somebody from an Ivy League school, they almost always have a very refined sense of speech and can really express their ideas clearly and convincingly. And you get that too from people who have gone to other colleges. Sometimes, it's included, sometimes it's not. It really depends on what the motivations of the particular teacher and the particular faculty and the hierarchy of systems that create that, It's a networked system that's been set up a certain way. It's a sort of funnel people, you know, because, you know, what it basically comes down to is that there has to be, at least this is the way that it's considered and disseminated in the public by the elites, is that, you know, there has to be people who take out your trash, who serve you at a restaurant, who clean your toilets, who, you know, clean your house in a lot of cases too. You know, people who do that, people who work on your cars, people who do all of the menial tasks, you know, dig ditches, build houses and things like that, you know, work security, park cars, all of that. There has to be people to do that. So in order for people to do that, you don't want them very well educated, because if they are, then they're not going to be satisfied with that kind of life, you know. And yeah, so if you don't have lots of money to go learn this at some institution, then the only way you're going to learn it is on your own, you know. And that's what I basically started doing, because I'm writing a book, and that book is about my experience in the mountains, my experience in life before that, and then during and after that. And a really important component to that was thinking for myself. And so when I got out of the mountains, I really started and then decided to write this book. Then I really wanted to study critical thinking as it was being taught incorrectly and correctly, in terms of personal authority, in terms of, like the Galileo quote that I started with was, you know, the humble reasoning of a single individual, and the strength of that, and that a person can really come up with their own answers in life, and come up with their own solutions to problems in life, and that everybody's solution doesn't have to be the same solution, because everybody doesn't have the same problems, and that, you know, the generalization that goes on in society where everyone is supposed to have the same solution even though the problem's different. Even though you're you and you've lived your life in a completely different way in most cases than how I've lived my life, and how it from everyone else, you know. And that's the thing, is that's the kind of tax cattle mindset that goes on, is that life itself is being homogenized to the extent where it can be generalized about, that everyone does have the same problems and lives the same life, and so the same solution fits, you know, one size fits all. And you know, my experience in the mountains was completely outside of that, as much as it could be. You know, there was definitely still parts of it that were there. You know, still talking to people sometimes from our culture, you know, and dealing with authority figures from our culture occasionally, and still supplying myself from that food chain, somewhat, you know. So, but it was enough. It was enough outside of the simulation of of civilization, that simulation of of what life is that goes on in this building I'm in now and every other building everywhere. You know, that this is life, and that actually learning to solve problems on your own in nature without any of this is not life. That's archaic. That's you know, that's the past, and that's just it's it's not genuine. It's not, you know, in other cultures, you know, generally more tribal, clan-based cultures, you know, a youth, when they're becoming an adult, is sent out of the culture to go do that, to go do what I did, to go live on your own, you know, and learn to problem solve on your own. Not to rely, not to go ask your elders, how do I do this? Please help me, you know. Not to ask your peers to come and help you do this, but you, on your own, in the world, dealing with whatever life throws at you. And gaining a lot of understanding and insight and abilities, physical abilities to deal with problems and tough through things and not submit to to be your own protection and your own you know, adult, to be your own authority figure, to handle your own business, to be able to do that and know that you can when problems arise. And you know, a lot of those stories about other cultures that do that, do send children off. It's often been sort of put in the spiritual guise of a vision quest. And you know, I'm not knocking that. That's beautiful. I have had that experience myself of really sort of just kind of where you really get in touch with the spirits of a place and the parts of your own mind that you don't normally come into contact with. The underbelly of your consciousness, and that's I mean, it is a valid way of doing it, but I think that it kind of ignores the main point of doing that, which is getting out of the simulation of culture and interacting with the world itself on your own, one-on-one, you and the world, and you know, getting away from anyone else who might be telling you how the world is, showing you how to get along in the world. You know, all of that went on before, and then you're thrust out to go see for yourself and problem solve for yourself. And you know, we don't do that anymore. Our connection with that sort of ritual is to you know, when you move out when you're 18, and then you're just thrust out into the simulation of culture again, and you know, the the only solution that you really have then is to get a job and get your own box to live in, and hopefully be able to buy a box to drive around in, and So you've never left a box.